In Cyprus, you are not going to find a single policy document which talks about migrants. All policy documents talk about alloglosy, those who speak other language than Greek. And this is very problematic because it frames otherness in terms of language deficiency.
In Macedonia, we don't have migrants who recently came to Macedonia to live and study there, but we have already multicultural society. Students from different ethnic backgrounds have right to learn their mother tongues. Although they say this is a multicultural school, it has no reflection in the curriculum. And teachers, even in the real multicultural schools, they don't refer to cultures and they don't give meanings to things concerning culture and identities or religion.
Εγώ είμαι καθηγητής σε αραβικό σχολείο και τα παιδιά μου δεν μιλάνε αραβικά. Ό,τι ξέρουν είναι να γράφουν αραβικά και σε μεγάλη ηλικία, 11-12 χρονών κτλ.
Τα παιδιά των μεταναστών αντιμετωπίζουν μια άλλη πραγματικότητα. Πολλοί από εμάς ίσως δεν ξέρουν καν την γλώσσα που μιλάνε οι γονείς τους.
In the Greek case, the school that I did my field work in has a large migrant population, mainly Albanian students, but also a significant number of Afghan refugee students. And as soon as the Afghan refugee students came into the school, it was considered that the school was disrupted. And up to that point, the Greek and Albanian students were assumed to coexist harmoniously. The Afghan refugee children brought a huge eruption of violence.
Δεν γίνει ρε να με σκοτώσει κιόλας, για πάτα και λίγο χώμα. Τι λένε, άσε μας ήσυχους. Για πρόσεχε λίγο τα λόγια, θα φας πολύ ξύλο. Ναι ρε, νομίζεις πως σε βοηθώ κιόλας. Άντε πήγες στη χώρα σου, στα χωράφια σου, που έχετε έρθει εδώ και μας έχετε κάνει άνω κάτω. Ναι ρε, εμείς σου φταίμε. Αν πεις άλλη μια κουβέντα παραπάνω, θα σας σπάσει το ξύλο. Άντε ρε βρωμιά ρε, που δεν έχεις ούτε να φας ούτε επειδή μας τη λες από πάνω. Είστε που είστε διαφορετικοί από εμάς. Βιάζομαι, αλλιώς θα σου έλεγα. Τι βιβλίο κρατάς εκεί? Διαφορικές εξισώσεις. Πού το βρήκες αυτό το βιβλίο? Δικό μου είναι, γράφω σε μισή ώρα στη σχολή. Έλα, και εσύ στο φυσικό πας. Τι γέλιο έχεις? Ναι, εσύ που το ξέρεις. Με έχει κόψει 4 φορές. Άσε, δεν μπορώ να το περάσω με τίποτα. Αυτό το βιβλίο με έχει βοηθήσει πάρα πολύ. Τελικά δεν είσαι από τους κακούς που έχω γνωρίσει. Είσαι μια εξαίρεση. Και εσύ είσαι ένας λογικός άνθρωπος. Άντε πάμε γιατί θα αργήσουμε. Ναι, πάμε και μόλις τελειώσουμε πάμε και καφέ σου απέναντι και καφετέρι. Έγινε, θα τα πούμε εκεί.
Another interesting concept was the idea of security and insecurity. What security means for the native population, which sometimes they feel threatened by the presence of the immigrants. And security for them is related to more police in the street, more control of the immigrants. But security for the immigrants, on the other hand, has to do with having the papers, having a job, having the possibility of walking the streets without being stopped by the police, keeping away from the police most of the time. So that is also, the idea of what is security in the public space for the natives and for foreigners. In Bologna, for example, they have more of conflicts because of the Italian, and also I think in Greece you have far more conflicts than we have on the public space issue in Spain, for example. And yet, the use of the public space has a lot of things in common. I think in the 3 spaces, people feel that immigrants invade their public space. Of course, this public space had been neglected or not used by the natives in many cases. But on the whole, that was the main criticism. They invade our space.
Women are not passive victims in this process of repositioning of religion. The way in which they decide to show or not to show their religious identities through certain kind of dress code, veiling or not veiling, From our works, it seems that Islam doesn't pose exceptional challenge to the supposed secular Europe, doesn't pose exceptional challenge to majority religions. There is no exceptionality of Islam.
In my case, I used an interpreter to interview one of the Afghan refugee students in the class that I was doing my field work in. And at one point during the interview, the little boy was describing his life after school, where he has to go out on the street and sell things. And he started crying. And that was a very intense moment. And I didn't know what to do. And then I asked the interpreter to ask him if he wanted to go on or not, and he said that he would rather not, so we stopped the interview. And apparently, as the interpreter explained to me, the little boy was feeling very dissatisfied about the fact that all his other schoolmates could go back home and play video games, watch TV, go out and play football, but he had to go out and sell things on the street. So he felt that was an injustice. But the thing is that because this Afghan student cannot speak Greek, it is impossible for him to communicate this feeling or this problem he has with his other classmates. And they think that the fact that he goes out and sells things after school it's what they do. It's their culture.
In Cyprus, we had multi-sided research, so we went to 3 different schools. One of them was a technical school, where there are migrants of various ethnic origins. The other is a school with a great number of Pondians, and the other is a school with a great number of Muslim students. Most of them are Iraqi refugees. Though the question of violence didn't come up in interviews with teachers, it came up with interviews with students. So they were really talking about violence. They were saying, like, I was walking on the street and here there's this bomb and people are like turning into fragments of flesh in front of me. But the point is that they describe those images not to say we are full of violence and that's why we emit violence. They narrate that in a sense that say we had enough. In a way they disrupt this idea that if you have experienced violence, you reproduce violence. No, they say we have experienced violence, that's why we appreciate being here and we claim a right to be here.
Όχι, δεν θέλω να πάω πίσω. Δεν έχω οικογένεια εκεί. Οικογένεια δεν έχω. Πού είναι η οικογένεια? Στα Αφγανιστάν. Πού είναι η οικογένεια? Ήμουνα μικρό. Σκοτώσανε τα λοιπόν μπαμπά, μαμά και μετά 10 χρόνια ήμουνα στη Τεράν. 10 χρόνια. Μετά ήταν στην Ελλάδα. Τώρα μένω εδώ. Ήμουν 8 χρονών. Και μεγάλησα με το θείος μου εδώ, στο Ιράν. Και τώρα μένω εδώ.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, ιστορίες 3 παιδιών που ταξίδεψαν μακριά, ήθελαν κάπου να φτάσουν και όταν έφτασαν στο μαγικό τόπο τους ζήτησαν να αλλάξουν όνομα, γλώσσα, αντίσημο.
Somehow the notion of culture puts people and processes in a particular frame.
Με τους δικούς σας, τι γλώσσα μιλάτε? Αλβανικά.
And I think it might be more interesting or productive to think about education in terms of, let's say, citizenship.
Και ο μικρός και ο μεγάλος εδώ γεννηθήκανε. Τα τελευταία χρόνια είμαστε εντάξει, προσαρμοζόμαστε κι εμείς εδώ πέρα, εντάξει.
Ήταν πολύ δύσκολη η γλώσσα, αλλά τώρα έχουμε προσαρμόσει.
Η αντιμετώπιση, ειδικά με τα χαρτιά, η νομιμοποίηση. Αυτό ήταν το μεγαλύτερο πρόβλημα, ειδικά και των παιδιών που γεννιούνται εδώ πέρα.
Citizenship, of course, is also a very questionable term, because most of these migrant kids are not citizens, and in some legal frames they are excluded by definition from becoming citizens in the future. And in Greece, for example, so far there was a very restrictive legal framework about migrant children born.
Legal citizenship is another way of including or excluding and marginalizing populations. To talk about citizenship in terms of practices and acts of citizenship. Consider what happens in school between students and teachers or between students as being a kind of performance of the right to be there and the right to claim the space or the language or whatever, that this would be seen through the frame of citizenship.
Citizenship, it's like human rights, you know. The kids are searching desperately for ways to negotiate these fantasies about citizenship.
Με λένε Μαρία και είμαι 13,5 χρονών. Πάω πρώτη γυμνασίου και οι γονείς μου είναι από την Τανζανία. Θέλω να σας πω κάποια από τα προβλήματα που αντιμετώπισα εδώ, στην πατρίδα μου, στην Ελλάδα.
Δεν είμαι η δεύτερη γενιά, αλλά απλώς η Ιωάννα, με καταγωγή από την Ιγυρία. Και βρίσκομαι στη δύσκολη κατάσταση και πρέπει να εξηγώ ότι γεννήθηκα εδώ και δεν είμαι μετανάστρια. Αλλά μετανάστες ήταν οι γονείς μου.
Από την ημέρα που γεννηθήκαμε δεν έχουμε δει κάποια διαφορά. Δεν έρχονται να μας πούνε παιδιά, ναι είστε Έλληνες, πρέπει να έχετε τα δικαιώματά σας. Υπάρχουν άλλες χώρες που με το που γεννιούνται τα παιδιά και πέρα τους δίνουν τα χαρτιά εκείνης της χώρας.
When I asked the students in class, the ones that I interviewed, to choose names that they wanted me to write them down as, a lot of the Albanian students chose Greek names. There seems to be a double negotiation of identity in the private sphere of the family, let's say. They appear to identify more as Albanian. And for example, they say, oh, well, if I were to marry, I would definitely marry an Albanian. I wouldn't marry a Greek. But then in the public sphere, they seem to be more keen on identifying as being Greek or Greek Albanian.
Another very interesting result we had, which Claudia Pedone had already worked quite a lot on them, is the ideas of citizenship. How immigrants are constructed as foreigners, when in fact, even if they feel and they have very strong relationship with the country of origin, they belong to this neighborhood. Sometimes they don't belong to the city, sometimes they don't belong to the new country. But they do belong to the neighborhood, and they are part of the neighborhood in many, many ways.